it saves governments a lot of money, like from the health benefits of that. We're talking about billions of pounds, dollars, euros that are being saved from the health benefits. So there's a real reason, a real incentive for not just consumers to buy the products, but for cities to be designed in a way which kind of accommodate people using them.
Hello and welcome to That Tech Show, the show that reveals the magicians behind the magic of everyday technology with me, Chris Adams, and that guy over there, Sam Gregory.
Hello.
So today is a learning day for me, and although it's transport related, Sam has a bit more of an affinity with today's guest. So enough of a tease out of the way. Sam, do you want to tell our listeners a little bit more about today's guest?
Sure. On today's episode, we welcome Rhys Howell, who comes to us from Berlin. And we have a good old-fashioned chinwag about exercise, tech, gadgets, and of course, e-bikes and the new age-old debate around the attitudes towards them. We also talk about city infrastructure around the huge increase of cycling, personal travel, and e-mobility as a whole.
Well, if that gets your e-bike motor running and your wheels in motion, then settle in and enjoy.
Hi, my name is Rhys Howell. I am the Chief Marketing Officer of Bikes, and I'm here to talk about my passion for all things tech, as well as the changing attitudes towards e-bikes in the world today.
What's your favorite tech? It's not the walking thing you just told us about, is it?
Yeah, I should say that that's my favorite thing. No, one of my favorite pieces of tech at the moment, it's a running power meter called Stride. I think coming from cycling and road racing, I'm used to using a power meter. So the idea of having a power meter for running is something which I have adopted and I like quite a lot. And there's so many stats that come off the back of that. So I'm very into like kind of connectivity and scrolling over like all the different numbers, whether they're useful for me or not.
What do you mean by a power meter then? What does that look like?
So this device itself is actually a foot pod, which sounds actually quite old school, but it's funny how foot pods have suddenly come back being a thing. But yeah, it's a small pod which goes on your shoe, and it basically records the movement of your foot in three-dimensional space, and it creates basically a power number. So it's calculating how much power you're actually putting out, when you're running.
Do you have to have one in each shoe?
No, you just have one. So a little bit like slightly cheaper power meters, which just measure on your bike. They only measure power on one side, and then they basically kind of double it. So it's kind of the same thing.
So what do you get out of that then? Does it tell you like horsepower?
Not quite. I'm not that fast. No, the main thing is that normally people run based on their pace. But if you're running into the wind or you're running up a hill or down a hill, then pace becomes like a really bad kind of way of seeing how you're performing. So power is consistent. So actually it means you can run up a hill at a set power, and then you're controlling your effort in a much more kind of sustained way. So in that sense, for me, it's just very intuitive to kind of run in this way or use that metric.
Is that like a real-time thing then? Are you like looking at this on a watch or something?
Yes, yeah. And also if I'm doing workouts, then you can do workouts to power as well. So that's also useful. Where I live in Berlin, I live next to this kind of abandoned airfield in the center of the city, and it can be very windy. So actually having the power meter is very, very useful for me because I am often running way slower than I would like to be. And I'm blaming the wind for that.
Fighting against the wind.
Yeah.
Sweet. So your passion is running, and does that translate over to e-bikes and cycles and things like that, or are they mutually exclusive?
I have to say, it's not necessarily my passion is running. It's actually my passion has been for a long time cycling, but it was the pandemic where I trained super hard to race, and I had like as far as my performance numbers went, I had my best year in 2020. But I only got to do 3 races, and I decided that it was kind of a waste of time, and I would instead spend my time and just for my own goals, basically go back and try and beat 10-year-old personal bests in the world of running. So, and that's actually where I kind of crossed over and was like going, okay, what are the tools that people are using now, and kind of got my head stuck into that area. So, still very much my passion is cycling and bikes, and obviously by extension e-bikes.
Those 3 races you talked about, is that a running race or a bike race?
Those 3 in 2020, they were bike races. So there were 2 road races and 1 time trial. Yeah, but the racing scene was kind of decimated a bit in the pandemic.
And as we are, primarily here to talk about e-bikes and the changing attitudes, were these races on e-bikes, or were they on the old school, those pedal things?
I mean, to be clear, e-bikes, they still have pedals. I'm sure at some point maybe they won't have pedals. Let's see where that goes. But no, they were on my road bike. So if you want to pigeonhole me as a roadie or a mountain biker, then I think I'm firmly in the roadie camp. So no, they weren't on e-bikes. Do you know what, though? I'd love to do an e-bike cross country.
Yeah.
The fact that the UCI brought in e-bike racing was kind of crazy. The UCI is quite old school. So for them to bring in an e-bike race was, I don't know, very surprising.
What's the UCI?
The Union Cycliste Internationale, I think.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So it's the governing body. Apologies, I probably butchered that, but yeah. So it's the governing body for the majority of international cycling events, basically.
Mm. What do you think the addition of the e-bike? You mentioned cross country, so I'm assuming there's some stamina thing. But what challenge or what dynamics do you think the e-bike brings to competitiveness? Because it's, again, we were talking briefly about the induction into e-bikes being primarily older people. It's a convenience thing, and it's sort of, I wouldn't say lazy, but it's for just to help and assist, as opposed to actually being a sporting competitive advantage or disadvantage. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at like a product that someone's going to buy, it's really about just enabling them or assisting them in the parts where it's slightly harder, I think. But from a racing standpoint, if everybody's on the same equipment, it's really a case of like it doesn't matter. Like,
people will race anything, won't they?
Yeah, exactly. They'll race lawnmowers. So I don't know how big this is in Germany, but I think it's big in America and the UK, lawnmower racing. Anyway, that's a slight digression, but I think the really exciting thing about obviously e-bike racing, mountain bike racing, is the fact that you kind of have to sort of make a few decisions about when you're using that power. It also allows for bit more interesting racing on some of the uphill sections, because normally like the hills, although they're not necessarily very big, they are slightly more boring because you're not really racing it. Like it just becomes around about your physical ability. So in a way, it's kind of takes away maybe the requirement just around physical ability. I mean, you still need to be really strong, but also then if you're traveling those sections at speed, then you're also building in just a bit more skill, I think, and you can maybe add more challenging terrain, which maybe would not have been possible if you didn't have like motor assist. So I just think there's a lot of potential to build a different kind of racing.
Does it get sort of looked down upon, like e-bike racing, in comparison to like what we know as cycle racing? Just thinking more about like, if you compare F1 to Formula E, I think at the moment people look down on Formula E a little bit, but that's probably going to change as the batteries get bigger and the cars get more powerful and all of that sort of stuff. Is there a similar thing in the e-bike world?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when e-mountain bikes came onto the scene, I mean, people laughed at them. There's always going to be this purist thread, which is going to be against e-bikes. But I think what I've always found is that as soon as you stick somebody on an e-bike, they realize how fun it is and their attitude changes. I think this is also true for urban e-bikes. It's very easy, I think, for someone like myself even to say, I don't need an e-bike. And then as soon as you sit on one, you go, oh, this is a lot of fun. And then you start to see there's one part which is like there's really obviously clear benefits around getting around the town with minimal effort and not arriving to work covered in sweat, especially when it's over 30 degrees like it is in Berlin. Or you just simply look like, oh, this is just fun. Yeah, that's true basically of all e-bikes. They are just all fun. So
Was that a similar thing you had to, did you have to get over that yourself?
no, not at all. I obviously have always had like non-pedal assist bikes, but I mean, I'm a bit more forward looking, I guess, like I will just I'll ride anything, to be honest, yeah, I never had any kind of thing against e-bikes at all, just something different. So I also thought about it, like if I wanted to ride with someone, say like e-bikes are even more, I'd say, kind of frowned upon than in the road cycling world rather than mountain biking, even though there's still obviously a bit of stigma with that. But just the idea of being able to ride with someone older, perhaps that's always ridden and they've lost a bit of fitness as they've grown older. So just to be able to have an e-bike so they can just keep up on a club ride or something like this, it just seems like a no-brainer to me.
So I've got a road bike and I cycle into work every day. I feel like it might take away my fitness. And, I actually like the fact that, I get my half hour of exercise in every day because I'm, pushing on this bike. And if I was to get an e-bike, I still think I would push hard, but, I'd get to work in 15 minutes. It will be a 15-minute exercise as opposed to a 30-minute exercise. So that's one of the things that I've kind of had a bit of a sticking point with, particularly with road bikes and commuting and stuff like that, is like, I think the fitness is reduced, but must be some, I don't know. Do you get people talking about that or questioning that, or do you have any kind of answer to maybe make me feel better about it?
I mean, I don't think it's not necessarily something which has come across us, but I can imagine that being like a general kind of concern. If you think this is my commute and this is how I'm going to get fit, it depends what your power output is. Again, coming back to power meters, but if an amper bike, you're getting 250 watt assist. So if you're pushing over 250 watts, then you're still getting a sort of workout there. The other benefit of an amper bike is you can just turn off the power and you don't actually get any resistance. So you could actually just turn the assistance off and just ride it like a normal bike. So at least there are opportunities that if this is a sort of a concern, then I think that's something which we have thought about during the kind of design process. And it is a slightly, light, heavier bike than a road bike typically. So, if you're riding an e-bike and it's about 16 kilos, it actually doesn't feel that heavy actually, but it's still going to probably be heavier than your standard commuter bike.
Broadly, how many different kind of categories are there of road bikes? So as an example, I'm imagining there's maybe power assist in the pedals versus power assist in the wheels. I don't know whether there's any more kind of categories to it that you guys produce or that you know of, and maybe would even advise against, or why you've gone for a particular route that you went down.
Yeah, there's different places where you can obviously put the motor, rear wheel, crank, front wheel, even there's some options. I think they all have pros and cons basically. For us, it made sense to kind of like have the motor in the rear wheel for a lot of reasons. Also, if you just think about that, the balance of the bike, you could argue that actually, and Hannes, who's our chief product officer, I mean, he'd probably maybe say something else, but like, I think actually, from my understanding, you get better assistance from the power if it was in the front wheel. This is where maybe if he's listening, he's going to shoot me, but I think for many reasons, people are kind of a little bit afraid, I think, of like front wheel drive in that sense. I think that's also true of like cars typically. And so actually having it in the rear makes a lot of sense, especially with regards to what people actually feel kind of comfortable with. I don't think the e-bike industry necessarily is like sectioning out bikes based on, where motors are placed. I don't think we're necessarily kind of like at that point, or there's no big argument of one's better than the other. And the most important thing is I don't think that really comes into consumers' kind of purchasing decisions either, to be honest. So yeah, I think from an e-bike standpoint, it's kind of not really like, it's not really been decided if there is a better option, or whether that is, maybe at some point this becomes something which consumers think about and care about, but I think for the time being, it's not necessarily in their mind.
And what other groovy tech do you have in the bike? Because I know that, what's that stupid bike that Apple sell? Schmoosh or something like this, smoosh or something. That basically there's some interesting features on it. Those like anti-theft protection and things like that, and GPS tracking. Are there any like nifty little gadgets on your bike? I can see a little screen on the crossbar there as well.
Yeah, so our new second generation bikes, yeah, they have this display on the top tube. Before that, we had an app, so we still have the app, but now we also have this this display, and so that's kind of useful for just getting feedback. So charging time, how much battery do you have, what assist mode are you on, for example, and then with the app, there's like a ton more information which you've got access to. So, for example, exactly as you mentioned, you can kind of lock the bike, and this will give you push notifications when if someone moves your bike after you've kind of locked it. So that's kind of super useful. It's becoming more of a kind of a common feature, and then you get a load of other kind of access to your stats through the app, and that's definitely something where we're growing and developing. So actually become not just a bike manufacturer, but also basically a software company in a sense, because we're also looking at like what tools can we build and develop which are kind of complemented to this more connected kind of product.
Could you put a power meter in the pedals, or is that like not how it works, sort of thing?
There is a torque sensor, which is what we use to obviously initiate the power assist. I mean, you could turn it into a power meter. You could also add like pedal-based power meter systems. If that was something which people really wanted. I think at the moment, at least with the kind of more commuter-minded consumer, it's not something they necessarily want. It's something I've definitely thought about because I am that way inclined. But yeah, I think it would be interesting to see if that's something which people become more interested in the future.
Would you say that the pandemic specifically completely changed people's perspectives on the e-bike thing? Because we've spoken about people just being a bit apprehensive about it, and purists saying, what removes whatever. Was COVID like a bit of a catalyst in terms of like, I mean, did you see your sales go up particularly during that time?
Yeah, so I think that it's not just e-bikes, it's actually just cycling as a whole. So e-bikes is one part of that. So there was definitely a massive shift towards people's kind of improved perception of cycling, which has kind of had peaks and troughs, I think, over the years. Obviously, I used to live in London. I remember the massive influence it had when Bradley Wiggins won the Tour de France and the Olympic gold in the time trial. I feel like this actually had a massive impact kind of in the UK, cycling in the UK. But the pandemic is obviously a big global event, and it's those it takes massive life-changing events to actually change people's behaviors. So, in Germany alone, which is like our number one market, there's 5 million bikes and e-bikes sold in 2020, so that first year. So that was an increase in sales by, I think it was 43%. So absolutely colossal sort of impact on the entire industry. And that's considering that obviously there were shutdowns, there's massive logistical issues, supply could definitely not meet demand. So just to even take that into account is really crazy. And I think whilst it's like obviously you do not want to live through a pandemic, but all of us have, then you still have to try and find some of the positives. And I think some of that was actually, definitely not just people's attitudes towards cycling, but also, the people who are in charge of city infrastructure actually being proactive and building sort of pop-up solutions, which is not true of all cities, but a lot actually were very good at this. Berlin, which is my hometown, was incredibly good. I mean, we saw infrastructure change, which I don't know when we would have seen it otherwise. And a lot of it, which was supposed to be pop-up, has become permanent. So I feel like this actually moved on city planning for e-mobility by, I don't know, I feel like it could be 5 to 10 years in a sense.
What's an example of the pop-ups you're talking about that have become permanent?
I mean, some of the worst roads that I can think of in Berlin especially from where I live. I mean, there was one road which was called Dam. Sometimes I would cycle with my wife to work because the roads are kind of fairly, they've always felt quite dangerous. This was one road where I was always scared to take her down because people drive like maniacs. Two, people would just park in the middle of the road, just block off a whole lane. So then if you're cycling along, you'd have to swerve out into the one lane which is available. Yeah, I actually couldn't believe that they built a pop-up. They took away one of the lanes and built a pop-up bike lane. And I kind of felt like this is just going to be temporary, but then they actually changed it and they built a permanent bike lane, actually different to that one, where they put the bike lane by the edge of the pavement and then they moved the parking into what was previously that additional lane. And now it's a breeze to cycle down there. And there are tons of other examples in Berlin where these kind of pop-up bike lanes have become permanent.
That's really interesting. Just looking at like some of the bikes, not just your own bikes, but like e-bikes in general, the design seems to have changed dramatically from what I thought an e-bike was. Do you think that's part of what is driving people towards adopting them?
Partially. I think that actually when the pandemic hit, people would kind of take any bike they could get hold of. So I think there's also a bit of a shift now where, as you know, supply chains are still not perfect. We've obviously had the war in Ukraine. We've had complete lockdowns in China. So this has affected global supply chains. But, you know, by and large, people, I think, have an opportunity to be a bit more selective about the product they have, where maybe they didn't have it in 2020, for example, because people were going crazy for bikes. So I think that now people are maybe they're a slightly more discernible kind of customer, I think. And there are more brands that people are becoming aware of, such as ourselves. And they're looking for a slightly more, I don't know, sophisticated looking product. I think it's one of the things we often talk about, how, you know, we have an e-bike which doesn't look like an e-bike. And that's because I think a lot of people's preconception around what an e-bike actually is this quite heavy, bulky, step through bike, which breaks down all the time.
You know, you kind of expect to see almost like an electric version of the Boris bike or any other city bike, you know, something big, heavy, clunky.
Exactly. I think that if you say like a commuter e-bike to someone, typically that's probably what comes to mind, because I think that type of, that silhouette has existed for so long. And I think that that's something which Ampler is helping to do, is to kind of help change perceptions around what an e-bike actually, you know, is and what it can look like. And not just, it's not going to weigh like, I don't know, you know, 20, 25 kilos. You know, we want to build a product which is, you know, you can lift up a flight of stairs. I mean, this is actually really important to us because, especially if you're riding a bike around, you know, city dwellings, there are going to be times when you need to carry a bike upstairs, whether that's in your apartment or whether that's, you know, outside. Then having a light product is actually super important. It's quite funny, actually, like where the Ampler office is in Berlin, there's actually like, we're right next to a park called the Gleisdreieck Park. And there's actually like a ramp, but you have to come around the first floor of the office and then down this ramp. And most people don't see it. So they cycle towards this set of stairs. And the amount of people we see who are on let's call it a traditional e-bike, they get to the set of stairs and they just turn around, go back the way they came from. And, you know, we're thinking like, oh, if you actually just turn around, you could go down this ramp. But then also, if you were on like an Ampler e-bike, then you'd just be able to pick it up and walk down the stairs anyway. So I think that's where a lot of the reasons why we built a light product is evident. And it's evident to us every single day when we're looking out the window.
What compromises were made to make it light? I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is the battery.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's all about kind of, I guess, balance and compromise. So, you know, when we're talking about range, which is really the main thing, rather than, I think people like to think about like, what's your battery capacity? I think we think a bit more about, you know, what's the range? Like, how far is someone actually going to, you know, ride this bike? And, you know, on a full charge, you can get up to 75 kilometers. So that is far and above like the average kind of commuter distance. And so in that sense, you can get kind of several trips out of your week before you need to charge it. And that's kind of the main thing that we kind of focused on. Okay, so if you have a larger battery and a heavier bike, you could say, oh, maybe I don't need to charge it. Like maybe it's once a week, or it's not even that, But I think that's what we felt, that actually having a lighter product, which still covers off the range and the distances that people would want to do, is a kind of fair compromise, to be honest. And then making it super easy to charge your bike is also then kind of paramount to that.
So we've all got our little side projects going on. Have you hired some people to work on your little projects?
Oh, absolutely. I'm useless at design.
There's a few services out there, though, right, to find people. Where do you go?
The best place that I've gone, if I was to pick one of these services, is probably Fiverr.
It's a bit misleading, though, isn't it? Because they're not going to be a Fiverr.
No. But, with all these side projects, we don't want it to cost the world. We just want a little bit of help on a little bit of copywriting or a bit of design that we can't do ourselves, and shouldn't really attempt to do it because you're going to do a bad job otherwise. If it's not your kettle of fish, don't boil the frog.
There's a mixed metaphor if ever you heard one.
Get someone on Fiverr. They'll do it much quicker. The prices are very, very reasonable, unless you want to go to the Fiverr preferred members, and get your startup up sooner.
And you can throw into that tech show at the same time by heading over to thattech.show or taking a look in the description and clicking the affiliate link, and you can try out Fiverr and you can be supporting That Tech Show whilst you're doing it.
Because we get a little bit of a kickback. Give it a go. Venture into the world of outsourcing. Your life will change at fiverr.com. What are customers wanting more of that we can't deliver just yet? Or what is the kind of future when it comes to e-bikes? Because it seems like they're in a really sweet spot right now. They're light. They can go, 75 kilometers is quite a lot. But where do you think everyone's trying to get to? What do you think the next evolution of e-bikes is?
I think that's really interesting because there's kind of sky's the sort of limit. I think actually what's kind of starting to blur more is like what is an e-bike? We talk about e-mobility, and within that starts to become other things which are kind of like a mishmash of a bike, and you're seeing mixtures between bikes and cars. We're seeing mixtures between like scooters and bikes, and actually the lines are kind of getting a little bit blurred as to almost what is an e-bike in itself, because e-mobility is kind of becoming this all-encompassing sort of term. So that's a really kind of interesting aspect to it, I think, where even just the look of what, or the question of like what is a bike, is starting to kind of change a little bit. For certain, obviously, then the connectivity aspect is something which is something consumers are increasingly interested in, having more things built into it. So like the theft detection, for example, people are looking for a product which can kind of do everything, basically. And that's also true when it comes to like usage. People are buying e-bikes to kind of replace their car journeys. So they're also looking for something, whether it's an e-bike and then it just involves adding panniers or baskets to that, if that suits their needs, or if it's child seats, or if it's adding a trailer, then that's kind of an adaptation in itself. Or are also more people moving to maybe larger bikes. So if you think about cargo bikes, for example, which Ampler doesn't currently make a cargo bike, but it used to be something which only like couriers basically used, pretty much. Like they're very rare, and now they're, at least in Berlin, they're fairly ubiquitous. So even attitudes towards other types of bikes is starting to change. And again, it's like people looking for a product which could kind of replace them using their car or using public transport. And yeah, definitely also those changing kind of environments, especially in an urban environment, allows people to actually do that. So the evolution is kind of happening, in both ways in that sense. So as where before it's always been consumers basically being ahead of urban planning, but now they're a little bit in tandem to use a bike pun. I wish I'd planned that, but that was accidental. But it does feel like that at the moment. Everybody is actually kind of moving in the right direction.
Are there any tandem e-bikes out there?
Probably. I'm afraid if there are, then I'm ignorant of their existence. But knowing some of the crazy and wacky bikes I've seen at Eurobike over the years, I would probably gamble that it definitely exists. So
the cargo bike one is interesting, though. Certainly, I mean, do you think that that's the sort of thing that might replace the sort of delivery scooter? We see a lot of them knocking around, don't we?
Cargo bikes are incredibly functional. I think the element which has held them back is the balance, like the weighted balance of those products. And I think that can be kind of intimidating. Obviously, having a much longer wheelbase, people's attitudes are kind of the same when it comes to cars, So especially when you have your first car, you're typically going to buy like something quite small. Ford Fiesta. My knowledge of cars is fairly limited, but I know. Actually, I was talking about it the other day. I remember when I wanted to buy my first car, I wanted a Ford Fiesta Mark II specifically.
Wow, you distinctly rooted in the 90s, I think. So the XRI version, was it?
It was just, it just had some slightly different modeling, I think, for around the lights. I don't know why.
Oh, it's the XR2. It's the XR2. There we go.
Is it XR2?
That was cool. That was a cool car.
Set them off now.
Yeah, sorry. Let's get back to bikes.
I was just going to say, I think, your first car is kind of like a smaller car typically, and then you maybe move on to coupe. Then maybe you'd go on to an estate when you've got a family and you're much more comfortable. And I think those kind of like, I don't know if they're cliches, I think they're fairly true kind of buying behaviors. They also kind of cross over, I think, into bikes. So you're definitely less likely to buy like a cargo bike like as your first bike. I think you have to feel pretty comfortable riding a bike. So I think also that then means that maybe this cargo bike segment also sort of develops and adapts to kind of compensate for some of those things. I've also been seeing a lot of trikes, by the way. I feel like the trike's making a comeback. So like with the two wheels at the front. I don't know if you call it like a reverse trike, but
yeah, you get a few sort of scooters that are like that, and I say scooters in the sort of petrol sense, that have the two wheels at the front to give that added stability. Like I was wondering whether the the onset of more e-bikes and e-scooters as well, whether that is going to take away some of the market that would previously be dominated by like petrol scooters, for example.
I would say definitely, but I think what's interesting, at least with scooters, is that the increase in scooters which are running on battery, e-scooters, has also grown exponentially. And it's not also just purchasing rent, these kind of rental, whether it is paying a subscription every month or whether it is just being able to like hop on and use the e-scooter for a single trip. Like these products have also kind of exploded. So in a sense, they kind of work together kind of naturally, especially in a sense that they're a more environmentally friendly kind of product. So I feel that they're also, those e-scooters are busy taking from kind of petrol scooters. And I think probably e-bikes are taking a part of that as well. To what degree, I don't think anybody actually really has a good answer for that at the moment.
I think they're all kind of, because of this, the electronic revolution, the electric revolution. I think all of these different methods of transport or even exercise or whatever are finding themselves in new market categories. And so people are rethinking, well, what are these good for? Like, what is the purpose of this now that we've got this added extra power? Maybe someone who was on the cusp of riding a bike, like let's say the low end, I have no idea what that means, but then they're like, well, with all this extra power, I actually just need a scooter. Or on the flip side, I was riding a moped or whatever, and I don't need all this power, so I can step down to a bike sort of thing. And people are discovering new ways to use scooters and new ways to use bikes. Maybe mopeds or scooters enter a world of like cross country as opposed to just being things you can nip around the town on. I have no idea, but it's a really interesting shift. So it feels like everything's kind of shifted up a notch or shifted up a level, sort of thing. And on these cargo bikes as well, the primary use I can imagine, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, the primary use of these are delivery folk. Judging by the prices of some of these as well, there's some crazy prices on them. But I would worry about, Bezos coming in with his drones and being like everything, all deliveries and stuff being all automated, and little buggies riding around that they don't need to be bikes with the advent of the electronic revolution.
That's got to be a way away, though, hasn't it? Surely.
Probably. But I guess my overall point is just we're rethinking why I've got this thing. What is the purpose of this thing now? Now you add a battery to it. It's just getting people to rethink,
Yeah, I think I mean cargo bikes is interesting just because it seems that most people use them. Whilst deliveries is obviously probably still the primary reason why people or businesses are using them. I think a lot of people are buying them and they seem to be using them to transport their dogs and children around in. I have a slightly skewed view being based in Berlin, but I think that that's probably fairly true, to be honest, of where a lot of the growth has come from. Because again, people are looking at cargo bikes and they're saying, well, we could use this to take the kids to school or the nursery school, to go to the park, to go have a picnic. We can use it to go to IKEA if we need to and actually transport the things we need back, as long as you're not buying like a bed or something. But you can carry quite a lot of weight, and depending on which product you have, some quite big bulky stuff in a cargo bike. And I think to a degree also that's the case with e-bikes. People are discovering, I think discovering is the right word, what you can actually do with an e-bike. That's because you might not want a cargo bike, but you can buy a trailer, and it's really no effort to cycle around with a trailer which has the kids or a dog in, or something else in the same way. So
is there a way to measure the impact of having weight on something like that? If I'm going to go and buy a cargo bike, or I'm going to buy something, put a trailer on an e-bike, you know if it's a human powered machine, that you're going to have to put in a bit more effort if you've got a bit more weight. And I suppose if you have a moped or something similar which has a petrol engine, then you kind of expect that that's going to do most of the grunt work for you, and maybe the engine will sound a bit strained potentially. But is there a similar sort of measure for an e-bike? Like, what if I was going to buy a bike and I think, well, actually, if I put some stuff in it, is it just going to stop? Or is that just an old view of the power that's in an electric bike?
all I was thinking about is I've heard a lot of two-stroke engines which sound like they're strained all the time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we're not talking about horsepower in that same sense, but we're still talking about power, how much power is required to move forwards. I don't know what the physics equation is, but I imagine it's very easy to calculate what sort of power is required to move a mass forward. Again, I don't think it's something which necessarily comes up with regards to what consumers ask for currently. I think actually the more ubiquitous adding a trailer to a bike becomes, or carrying even heavier loads on a bike, which I see as being inevitable, then I think this is going to be something which we then talk about like as a metric which people judge their product by. I think the main thing that people look for is like, how much power do I get, to assist me, basically. And for most people, 250 watts is more than enough. So yeah, that's the main thing which people are kind of interested in currently.
Is that a confusing thing though for people to understand what power means in watts, for example?
Yeah, I think there's definitely people are educating themselves more in this sense. If you're someone like me who comes from like road cycling or road racing, then you know what a watt represents. I mean, it's interesting because even to know what is a watt from a power meter, there's actually no kind of industry standardization, to be honest, in how that is actually measured. So, but I think that we know like what is the average sort of power that somebody puts out, through testing, through riding a bike, through a commute. And so at least we know that 250 watts is more than enough for most people. I think for consumers, they're probably still not sure, like a large majority of them, what does that actually mean? But they're slowly becoming more educated. It's also part of the reason why a company like Ampler also moved into retail, because we actually know how important it is still for a direct-to-consumer brand to actually have these touch points, because people do need that extra level of kind of education around what an e-bike is and what it's capable of, and even to your point, what does 250 watts feel like? Yeah, so I think it's one of those areas where it's slowly kind of developing and growing, but it's really hard to, like, how else do you communicate that benefit to someone? Of course, you can talk around, this bike would get you up this sloped hill in X amount of time, for example. So you can look at other measurements like that, but then there's also so many other kind of variables which go into that. So in a sense, the watts is something which becomes slightly easier to measure. So if you're looking at different products, you can compare that between every product, because every e-bike brand will be talking around how many watts we're basically putting out.
You mentioned about the weight thing. I thought that would be top of people. Well, not obviously people don't want to necessarily admit to it, but like how their weight would be affected if say they were slightly overweight or whatever. Like the specs and the power that they read, surely that would diminish with the weight of the person or what they intend to carry or whatever.
Yeah, of course. I mean, again, in road racing more specifically, actually the measurement which you pretty much are measuring is not just watts, it's watts per kilogram as a differentiator. So I think this is kind of also true. Again, that level of thinking, I think, is not necessarily there in the consumer's minds. They're not looking at like, what's my weight and then what's the watt per kilograms kind of work out to be. But I think, definitely if you want to carry a heavier mass at the same speed, then you are going to require more power. But I think there's a lot of scope in a 250 watt assist, where by and large, that's going to be more than enough for most people. So I don't think it's really in consumers' minds for that 250 watt number maybe is not going to be enough for them. I could be wrong. There's probably fringe cases to that, but I think that's generally the case where that's not necessarily the big deciding factor in people's minds.
So where did the bike fascination stem from? Where did that first twinkle in your eye first sparkle?
I mean, I've always ridden a bike. Even as a really young kid, I remember there was a road at the end of I grew up in a small village, and there was a hill at the end of the road, and a Dean Road. I only know because I wrote about it at some point. I just remember like my dad being able to ride up it, and I couldn't get up it like in one go. So I was always like determined, like I want to be able to ride up this climb without getting off, and then the joy of actually being able to do that for the first time as I don't know how old I was. It must have been about 6 or 7, I think. So I think I lost a bit of my love for cycling when I moved to when I went to university, because I lived in Nottingham. It was a very small city, and you just walk everywhere. It's that small. Moved to London, and I actually thought it was too dangerous to ride a bike for a long time. And then I actually got into running. So we're almost going full circle on this, but I got bored of running, and then I started doing triathlon, and I remember having to borrow someone's bike to do the London triathlon. And I just remember a moment where I got out from doing the swim around like a dock just off of the Thames, which is maybe one of the worst experiences of my life.
What, swimming in the Thames?
Yeah.
I can't imagine that's pleasant.
It's not pleasant. And it was also exhausting. Like I got out and I just felt drunk. Like I couldn't walk in a straight line. I was so tired.
Did you ingest much of the Thames?
I did, and did not get sick. So that says more about me and the bacteria in my gut than it does the cleanliness of the Thames, I think. Yeah, and I remember getting on the bike and the feeling I had was like, I'm home. Like, they were genuinely what I thought in my head and how I felt. And it was from there where I was like, right, I just want to ride my bike. I just want to ride a bike now. So I bought my first bike from a retail store. I remember riding back during rush hour with first time with clips, with cleats, and
God.
the fear of falling over in the middle of rush hour, and didn't, which is quite unbelievable, to be honest. And from there on in, I took my bike everywhere. So I actually enjoyed a bit. I enjoyed a bit of the danger of riding around London. I'm glad to say that actually when I go back to London now, it's a lot safer. Like the infrastructure has improved so much that I'm very happy that more people can enjoy riding around the city and not necessarily kind of suffer in the way that I did and so many other people did. Yeah, and then it was from there on in that I decided that I wanted to work in the cycling industry and made the switch and moved out of London and moved to the countryside in Germany to work for Canyon.
You said you made the switch to wanted to work for the bike industry. Where were you before that?
So before that, I was working as a digital marketing consultant, and I was really like the best paid gigs in London were really around quite boring clients. So I did a lot of, I don't know why, but I got a bit of a reputation for being able to handle quite boring clients. So, I did stuff for like the UK government. I did stuff for banks, FMCGs. I did have some good stints working for companies like Xbox, but I really just felt like I wasn't necessarily doing something that I was truly passionate about, and I wasn't having a positive impact in the world, even if that was small. So that's where I really decided I wanted to follow kind of one of my passions, which was either going to be rugby, which I was still playing at the time, or cycling. And cycling won that one.
That's interesting. So on that note of like something you're passionate about, something you want to make a difference on, what did cycling, or more specifically, I guess, what does Ampler provide? What do you think, what changes do you want to see in the world based on your decision to work in the cycle industry?
I mean, I think in the most simple sense, just more people to be riding bikes. I would like to see cities built and designed for people and not for cars. There are times when anyone probably is probably seen or experienced it, where maybe at some point where a road has to be closed or something because of roadworks or something, and there's no cars on it. They become an instantly different place to live. It's not just healthier because obviously you take away all of these exhaust fumes. They're just better places for people to coexist. And definitely in our urban environments, this seems like kind of a no-brainer, to be honest. And I think we also see this a little bit in urban inner city areas where, even from people's political kind of decision making, the people are aligning more with people who are more interested in better living spaces, basically, for people. So, and I see that even if you're just focusing on the cities, I mean, obviously people buy Ampler products from all around the countries that we sell to, but even if you just look at cities, then that has a massive impact. One, and like if you're just looking at happiness of the people who live there, but then also if you're looking at the impact on the environment. And you could say one is environmental impact, one is also health. So people obviously benefit from being more active by taking a bike instead of a car. They're healthier because there's less exhaust fumes. There's also, if you want to be kind of take the cynical view, there's also it saves governments a lot of money, like from the health benefits of that. We're talking about billions of pounds, dollars, euros that are being saved from the health benefits. So there's a real reason, a real incentive for not just consumers to buy the products, but for cities to be designed in a way which kind of accommodate people using them.
Are you already actively involved in those changes? I mean, by obviously working with Ampler and helping e-bikes exist, you're naturally making those changes. But are you say working with local authorities or health organizations and whatever, and partnering with them, or doing anything kind of like that to make those changes, or to sort of like encourage progression of those changes?
Yes, we are. We're probably not doing as much as we would like, but this is definitely part of our long-term vision. I mean, even just recently, we partnered in Berlin with a thing which is called Stadtradeln, which is to promote city cycling, for example. So, um, and it's a big thing in Germany, which is just encouraging people to get out and ride their bikes. So it's obviously encouraging a healthier behavior. They also, if you record your rides on their app, then this is then data which they can use to actually see how people are moving through the city and influences kind of city planning. So even like a small partnership like that was kind of like a no-brainer for us, to be honest. And I think this is also something which we as a business just want to do more and more of as we continue to grow. I actually think that we see ourselves as with a real desire to be kind of leaders, not just in the products that we develop and the behavior we want to encourage, but also, yeah, helping people's environments to become more bike friendly, basically. So I think, for a business our size, we're still like from a, like, I guess, I don't know if it's a UK term, but would be classified as an SME. Then we already have kind of we have a dedicated person looking after sustainability, and the whole business has this as kind of as a topic, like how do we also become more of a sustainable business, and be one of those few businesses in the cycling industry which kind of actually has like a B Corp certification. So it's very important with regards to what our environmental impact is as a business, but also that is interwoven with everything. Like, how do we have happier employees? How do we also promote kind of healthier kind of lifestyle and behavior also with our consumers? The whole shebang. I think this is also like a very modern approach, and B Corp's a good example of where businesses are now actually doing more, and it helps create the framework for them to be better businesses, basically. So we've always had that ambition, but B Corp also then gives you that avenue to kind of go down and check off the things which you should be doing, and then we are slowly but surely.
Yeah, it's really aspirational. I think it kind of it ties in so naturally just to the whole e-bike thing, is that people are getting out. There's getting more people out there, healthier and greener, and all the rest of it. So it's a lovely synergy to all of that, and it's great that you're kind of you're obviously very passionate about all that kind of stuff, and it's nice to know that you are actively doing something about it, through your work, and you made that choice and it kind of paid off. Is there any kind of final thoughts that you have or you want to leave our listeners with before we wrap up?
I guess the most obvious one would be, if you haven't tried an e-bike, or if you're unsure of riding an e-bike, then I would just suggest you try one. It doesn't have to be an Ampler bike. It can be anyone. I think if you're unsure on the fence, then just try one. Because we see that people's attitudes are changing. So if you haven't tried one or you're a bit unsure about it, I would just say, maybe just try it out, and you'll just find that they're a lot of fun. So a
couple of quid, pick up a Lime bike and pop down the shops with one.
Yeah, I mean, actually, honestly, I think the difference of the rental bike, I don't know, like the subscription or like pick up and go e-bikes, I think in the end they have had a positive impact just on people's attitudes to e-bikes, because they're so accessible. There's such a low kind of barrier to entry, to use that sort of term, but it really is. It just gets people to try out a product, and have that kind of first experience of an e-bike. So in that sense, whilst maybe they're not the most always the most environmentally friendly, because we see a lot of waste from these type of businesses, they definitely help move the needle when it comes to attitudes.
It's a stepping stone, isn't it? So
yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Rhys, for spending some time with us, talking to us about e-bikes. It's been a fun little chat. And thanks for being part of the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, good talk, that one. It inspired me to take a little look at e-bikes. They're certainly not what I thought, for sure.
Yeah, I actually built my own e-bike off the back of this episode, so I was inspired.
Yeah, and I've seen that as well. It's cool. So, thanks for sticking around until the end. Remember to follow or subscribe if you haven't already, and why not leave us a review over on Podchaser, and that will certainly help people get a glimpse of whether this episode is right for them.
Next time on the show, we have Jeff Perry, who will be talking about mindset and coaching. So, we'll see you then.
See you then.